About 10 years ago, I was a heavy drug user living in a medium-sized city with a very high crime rate in Alabama. I was staying with some fellow users in a rundown seedy apartment in the ghetto, next to a halfway house. I'm also not some great big guy. I'm 5'6" and weigh 140 pounds now, and back then when this happened, I was barely breaking 100 pounds. Anyways, it was around 3 or 4 a.m. one night when I ran out of cigarettes. There was a 24-hour convenience store a couple of miles away from where we were staying, and I didn't have a ride at the time, so I figured I would just walk. I had gotten maybe a little over a quarter of a mile from the apartment when I heard a car creeping up behind me. I kept on walking, waiting for it to pass, but it kind of just idled slowly behind me. Now, as I said earlier, I wasn't in a very good life situation at the time and had either had dope or paraphernalia on me. So I was paranoid that at any second I would see blue lights or hear a siren and I would be busted. Finally, my curiosity got the best of me. I glanced around and saw that it was not a cop, but an older model Oldsmobile Cutlass. Alarms started going off in my head and I found myself suddenly wishing it were a cop. I started walking faster and the car pulled up beside me. I looked over and saw the passenger side window was down, and there looked to be two cracked out looking guys, probably in their late 30s or early 40s, just kind of watching me. I was just about to take off running through someone's yard when I looked over and saw a flash coming from the passenger side window. At first I thought I had gotten shot, but then it occurred to me that it was the flash of a camera. Before I could process what had just happened, to my relief that car took off. My comfort was short-lived though. A little way up the road I saw that car had pulled up into a parking lot and parked facing me. I stopped in my tracks, looking at it and trying to decide what my next move should be. When I saw the car start to back out and head in my direction, across the road to my left, there was a cemetery surrounded by a wrought iron fence, which I first attempted to climb, but I couldn't make it over the sharp points at the top. So I jumped back down and ran across the road to an old abandoned field that used to be the local fairground. I had turned a corner before I jumped the chain link fence to get into the field, and fortunately the guy in the car didn't see which direction I went. I hunkered down in some tall grass and lay flat on my stomach for what seemed like forever, but was probably around a half an hour, just watching the car creep up and down the road. Eventually I quit seeing the car, and I assumed they had given up on me. So I got up and dusted myself off and called a friend to come pick me up. No way in hell was I going to risk running into them again. So my friend showed up and gave me a ride to the store. And on the way back, right past where the first car got behind me, I looked down this old driveway to an abandoned house, and sure enough, there was the Oldsmobile, just ominously sitting there. I never ran into those guys or saw that car again. But then again, I never really walked around after dark in that neighborhood again. I've racked my brain trying to figure out what their intention was and why they would take my picture, but I've never quite figured it out. If they hadn't been so cracked out looking, I would have considered they were just concerned citizens looking out for the neighborhood, since I too was extremely cracked out looking, but they were way too menacing for that to be the case, and if it was, why didn't they just call the cops? I'm also curious to see that photo, just as a reminder of how far down the gutter I was at the time, but not curious enough to seek those guys out. Anyways, thank you for sharing my story. This story takes place in the summer of 2017. My name is John. I live in a rural part of Alabama, but choose to work in the city. The drive is about 45 minutes or so depending on traffic. However, by the time I pick up my son from the sitter, get dinner, and get home, I've been in the car for about an hour and a half. My house is surrounded by trees and the neighbors are few and far between. It can get pretty lonely out here, but I enjoy the privacy. One evening I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd. The doors on my storage shed were wide open. I told my son to sit in the car as I got out to investigate. I didn't see anything missing and closed the doors back. I know the wind had not blown them open because it had two latches that must be open to get in. The next day, I looked around and much to my dismay, two weed eaters along with a few other garden tools were missing. I know I should have contacted the police, but I knew there wasn't much they could do at that point. Throughout the week I had some time off and decided to tackle some yard work that I needed to get done, which included cutting down a medium-sized tree that had grown next to my house. Once I cut it down and took everything out, I had to move it to the edge of my property, just inside the woods. I planned on cutting it up another day. Fast forward to the next Friday, I left work at 7 p.m., picked up my son, and we arrived home at around 8:30 p.m. As I pulled into the driveway, my son and I noticed something laying across the driveway. It looked as if a tree branch had fallen across my driveway. As I drove up to it, though, I thought to myself, there are no trees over my driveway. Once I looked down and really got close to it, my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. It was the tree I had cut down the other day. I had put it clear on the other side of my property until I could cut it up. I recognized the marking from my chainsaw. I didn't know what to do. My son and I sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I rolled the driver and passenger side window down just to get an inch closer and listen to hear if anything was out there. I didn't hear anything. I then realized for me to get to my house, I had to get out and move the tree. I told my son that I was going to get out and move it, just enough so that we could get past, and I would lock the doors. If anything happens, he could use my phone to call the neighbor who lived the closest. I darted out of my car and moved the tree slightly out of the way. and raced back to my car. I was terrified. Luckily, my son was on the ready to unlock the doors for me to get back in. I drove toward my house and we got in safely, and I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I woke up to find the tree was moved again, this time a few feet behind my car. To this day I'm still baffled at who or what could have done this, or what their intentions were. Next time I will be smarter and call the police. I do have another question that I cannot answer though. How did someone know where I put the tree after I cut it down? Whoever had done this had been watching me. I had put the tree in the woods. The thought alone, enough, is keeping me up sometimes. It has taken me a while to write up this personal experience for you, mostly due to just being busy with other things. Though I will admit it's also due to a bit of fear. Not that you would bother me about the story, but about invoking other things to come back into my life. While I won't give you the specific location details, I suspect that a little investigation would lead you to the location. I cannot stress this enough. Do not contact the current owners. Just don't. From shortly before I was born until sometime in the mid-90s, I think 92 or 93, my grandparents lived in a small town outside of Selma, Alabama. The town they lived in was rather well known, due to having several antebellum mansions in it. One such mansion was my grandparents' home. The property had been abandoned and largely forgotten by the time my grandparents had bought it in the 1970s, and my father spent much of his free time restoring the home. I cannot say specifically how long, but I know that it had been empty for at least a decade at the time of purchase. It took my dad and grandfather several years of working on their own to restore the home, as well as adding some new modern fixtures and other upgrades. My grandmother, for her part, filled the home with various antiques, most of which dated around the period of the home. Due to its age, the home was on the historical register, and would later, after they sold it, be turned into a bed and breakfast, though I don't think it is such now. Whatever the case, paranormal experiences seemed to happen weekly there, even during when my grandfather and father were restoring the home. Some stories I remember offhand were his seeing something white and see-through sweep across the front hall one night while they were working on the property. They made sure to double-check everything before locking up, but they never did find anything. He passed it off as the wind catching a painting drop cloth, though he would admit reluctantly there was no wind, and he had not started painting quite yet. My grandmother related hearing footsteps come halfway down the main staircase one day while she was on the hall phone, only to have those steps turn and go back up the stairs slowly. Doors would randomly lock and unlock themselves. Various things getting moved around or just went missing in general, and there was an overbearing sense of just being watched in the home at all times, especially in one room at the corner at the top of the main staircase. That room at the top of the stairs was the center of the most activity, even though the last owner, an elderly woman, had died in another room. Personally, that room always bothered me. I always felt like something was watching me from it. Something was angry that didn't want me there. Only if the door was closed, could I walk past it. Otherwise, I would go out of my way to simply avoid being there at all. There were 2 staircases that led down the hallway and downstairs. My half-brother related a story from around when I was born, when he was checking the property for my dad one afternoon. While walking around outside it, he stated that he got the distinct feeling that he was being watched. Looking up at the darkened house, he saw the face of an old man staring back at him from a window. The window happened to be in the room which I had problems with. After the property sold, I spent a week at the bed and breakfast in 2000. I specifically told the owner to put me in any room other than the one at the top of the stairs, to which they stated they had quit renting it out anyway. The door was now permanently locked, from what they seemed to say. Apparently they had numerous people who, after renting that room out, would simply check out and leave. None would give a reason for their sudden departure. While I stayed there, I spent most of my time visiting people who I had kind of grown up with and such like that, though we had moved away when I was just a child. We did still go back on a regular basis. We saw some places in Selma, when my father had worked, and only returned to the house to sleep. One afternoon, maybe a day or so before I was set to leave, I sat down to dinner with the host and hostess. The conversation turned to my history with the home, and some of the strange experiences I had over the years. When the subject came to the room at the top of the stairs, and what my half-brother had personally witnessed, the host and hostess shared a look of absolute disbelief before the man cleared his throat. He said that what I told them was on par with what they themselves had experienced, though they noticed that they believed that they knew why the disturbance had originated. During landscaping work in the rather large, about 5-acre backyard, they were forced to cut down one of these ancient oak trees that were there. In the roots of the tree they found the remains of an unmarked grave. This prompted further investigation, upon which they discovered no less than 6 more unmarked graves there. The remains were moved to a local cemetery, but were quite badly beat up, and while they wouldn't, and they refused to go into detail, tell me much of what they found there outside of that, they did make it quite clear that it was their belief that the unknown cemetery was directly tied to the spirits that were in the home. They also related one final ghost experience that makes me smile. I know this is the kind of thing that shouldn't, but it does. They note that the large barn which my grandfather built, it wasn't original to the property. It was apparently haunted. However, the ghost seems to just come and go on its own free will, and hasn't really done anything overly spooky. Rather, from time to time, people in the barn have noticed a distinct sound of old country or gospel music that sounds like it's being played on an old record player. That seems to be centered around a small office located in the interior of the barn itself. The reason this makes me smile, well, that wasn't an office. My grandfather had built that little room, put a small cot in there, and a record player, where from time to time he would take a nap while listening to his records. He was the happiest when he was puttering around in his barn, usually with my grandmother at his side, while listening to those records of his. I can't help but feel that now that he has passed on, he went back to the old home he was happiest at. I guess it goes without saying he and my grandmother didn't want to sell the old home. Some of the family effectively forced that to happen, and, well, the fact that my grandfather and grandmother didn't live long enough after it sold makes me seriously feel the sale was directly tied to them dying in some manner. Now, as I said, as far as I know, the place is still very active on the haunting side. It is also a private residence now, so you might as well have a general idea of where the home is. but by no means you should not contact the current owners. I haven't done so since 2000 myself, and I do not know if it's still an Airbnb or not, and even if it is, I doubt the owners would want to become a ghost attraction. Anyways, thank you so much for sharing my story, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me start off by saying that Alabama is a weird and wonderful place. Sure, we have a sort of redneck vibe going on, but the state is actually a very beautiful and nice place to live in. The state is no stranger to paranormal events, especially in the UFO and alien category. An example of this is the Falkville Metal Man. Interesting story there. Anyways, this experience came from my sophomore year of high school. At the time, movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and Interstellar sort of put my interest into space. I would periodically lay out in my backyard, listening to music, and gaze up at the stars. Just sitting there imagining what goes on up there, just relaxing. Occasionally, I would see a moving star, but would always attribute those to planes. Except, this one star was far off from a plane, and I, for some reason, just kept my eyesight on it. It was going west, when suddenly, it instantly changed directions at a 90-degree angle, then started going south. I was confused, so I kept staring at it. A few seconds later it changed directions instantly again, and this time it was going west. Only after it changed course it revealed itself to not be a star. Something appeared behind the star. It was oval-shaped, glowing orange, and was massive. It made no noise, and started glowing extremely bright. I sat there in disbelief and kept my gaze on it. It looked like, upon further examination, that the star was in front of some sort of aircraft. It silently moved across the sky over my house and then suddenly just disappeared. The star was still there, and it was still moving. I was sitting there intrigued, hoping the craft would glow again, but the star soon faded into the night sky and disappeared itself. I ran inside and asked my family if they saw anything, assuming they would be considering the thing in the sky was glowing extremely bright. However, none of them saw anything. I wrote this down in my journal, which I had used to recall all sorts of weird paranormal events that I either research or experience. What makes the story weirder is that an hour later, military aircraft were out all over the sky. I don't know if that's normal, and we do sometimes see airplanes fly over our house, but never this many. There were dozens of airplanes, all seemingly scanning the sky. I've never told anybody what happened. My friends wouldn't believe me considering I come from a conservative environment, where people would scoff at the idea of anything outside of Earth. I still don't know what I saw that night, but I'm pretty sure it was a UFO. So some backstory. My grandparents live in an antebellum mansion in Alabama. We would travel there on a rather regular basis whenever my dad had vacation time or I was out of school. From time to time, my father and grandfather would head down to the back roads, or just various places, and just go for fun car rides. It was interesting and relaxing, and we just talked all kinds of random stuff while exploring these very rural areas. A couple of times we would go to the old Cahaba to wander around the abandoned city. In any case, on one such ride I remember we had turned down this one back road and were coming up on the railroad. I loved and still do love trains, so naturally I was hoping we would see one. As we approached the crossing, there was no train. The car bumped across the grade and started down the other side, when I noticed something on the left side of the car. Looking out, I saw something that I can only describe to this day as some sort of demon. Across the tracks and back in the weeds there was an old wooden train station. The station looked to have seen better days, being severely run down and dilapidated. At the far end of the platform there was a tall wooden water tower, and just in front of it sat an old wooden boxcar. I remember talking about that with my parents and everyone in the car, but apparently I was the only person that saw it. I even drew what I saw when we got home, but no one else remembered seeing anything of the sort. Years later, after my grandparents sold the old mansion and moved to Florida, I found myself taking a vacation in the old area. I wanted to see the old mansion again. It had become a bed and breakfast at this point, and to explore my old stomping grounds. I spent several days just going around and recording various places for my parents, as well as doing some personal ghost investigating. I did everything I could to track down the station, took a near infinite number of back roads, and not once could I find it. I even headed to Selma to check out the city's records, but even then I couldn't find any such evidence of this station. This place stood out in my mind. Even now it stands out. I know what I saw. I know that there was some sort of demon crouched in those reeds outside of that station with red glowing eyes. I know there was something there. This, as well as a few other details I've not listed here, puts the existence of that station somewhere between 1865 and the early 1900s. I don't know. I definitely know I saw it, and maybe it's one of those things that travels through some sort of dimension. One thing I was able to see is that there was a train station demolished 30 years prior to me even being there, and what I don't understand is, how would I be able to see the ghost of some sort of building? Is that even a thing? Hello, I'm going to start this story by saying I'm lucky to be here typing this. I'm a 24-year-old woman from Tennessee. My parents always beat the stranger danger into my head and told me never to pick anyone up off the street for any reason. Around March or April of 2020, the lockdown started to hit my city due to the pandemic. I had taken leave from work due to the pandemic for a medical condition. My husband works second shift, so on nights when my boredom was getting the best of me, I'd set out on a nice drive with my music blaring. I prefer driving the back roads because there are no cops and I like going fast. I know, it's dumb, but cars are meant for going fast, and it's in my blood. Anyway, I went on this back road where my aunt happens to live. It's about midnight and I'm driving down this road. I see a woman waving her flashlight and running toward my car. Keep in mind, I'm stupidly going 60 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. I hurry and slam on my brakes, barely missing this skinny tiny woman. I rolled my window down to check on her, and she was panicking. She asked me to give her a ride to the Pilot gas station. It was only a 2-minute drive from where we were. At first I told her no, I couldn't. I didn't know her. She kept begging me and said her boyfriend had beat her up and kicked her out. She also had this big purse, and when I kept declining, she dumped her bag onto the road and said, "Look, I have no weapons or drugs. I just need a ride to the Pilot, please." And I, being a supporter of women, obviously because I am one, and being a survivor of domestic abuse myself, I stupidly agreed to let her in my car. I told her, "I can call the police for you," and she said, "They've already been called." And I said, "Well, then shouldn't you wait for them? If we leave, they won't find you." And as I'm saying this, I see a police officer drive by real slow while glaring into my car. Oh, there's the cop now. Let me turn around and get his attention. He can help you. At this point, and when I said this woman glared at me with the evilest eyes, grabbed me by the arm, and told me through her toothless mouth,
"If you turn around, I'll get my boys to hurt you."
That was the moment I realized I made a big mistake. I should mention that when I saw this woman on the street, I couldn't know that she didn't have teeth and was an addict. I noticed it when she was closer to me in the car. She didn't know that I carry a knife in my door pocket, and I was ready to use it if needed. I keep driving to the Pilot, and we're about 30 seconds away when she tells me, "Not this Pilot, take me to the one the next town over." At which point I said, "No, I'm taking you to this Pilot. It's what we agreed on." And I hurried in front of the Pilot doors. I looked at that girl and I firmly said angrily, "Get out of my car, get out now." And she said, "You can't do this to me, please, you'll find me." And I yelled again, "I don't care, get out or I'm going to stab you." She opened the door and got out. As she was climbing out, I threw her purse at her, and she shut my door and yelled some obscenities. I rolled my window and yelled back, but we won't get into that. I hightailed it out of there. I called 911 to report what had just happened, and they said they already had police in the area looking for her. Halfway down the road, the shakes set in, and I had a panic attack. That was the scariest 2-minute drive of my life. Finally, I got home and told everything when my husband came home. We called the pilot shortly after my 911 call, and they told us the girl was arrested and they found a blanket inside of her purse with all kinds of drugs rolled up into it. Do you all remember her mentioning how she dumped her purse on the road for me? The blanket didn't fall out and I had no idea it was there. I was relieved she had been arrested. However, I was terrified that she did have quote-unquote boys to hurt me. She knew what I drove. My car isn't your average car. Mine is a modded one with bright metallic red wheels, metallic red accents, and a giant purple dual exhaust, and other mods. But the other ones aren't visible as they are under the hood. Also, not many people in my city own this car model. I was also scared she'd remember the details of my car and her boys would easily find me. I avoided that road for weeks and didn't leave my apartment for a couple of days after the incident out of fear. It's been over a year and nothing else has came of it. I learned my lesson, and I've never told anyone this story except my husband and best friend. I feel stupid for ignoring my gut, and my parents taught me much better than this. But girls, please, never put anyone you don't know in your car, even if it's another girl. Women aren't necessarily any safer than men. Hello, I am 15 years old and live in a small town in Tennessee. I live a little bit away from town, and my street road is populated with houses dotted every so often. This isn't a very long or perfect story, but it's always made me think twice before going somewhere late at night. This probably happened around a year ago by now. I had left my house at around 10 p.m., and I had snuck out to see a friend and hang out for a little bit. We had had a good time, and when I left around midnight, my house was probably about a half a mile away from his. The road had quite a few curves in it. It was also pitch black outside, but the dark never really bothered me anyway. As I rode my bike up a semi-steep hill, blasting music and almost froze halfway to my house, I thought I had heard rustling to my right. To my right was someone's huge yard. Their house was off to the side of it, and the yard had not been maintained in quite some time, so the tall yellow grass was waist high, which also meant that I couldn't see whatever was making the noise. I didn't think much of it until I reached the peak of the small hill. Instinctively, I looked behind me in case there was a car coming up the road, and instead, I heard the tip-tap of paws running on the right of the road behind me. As soon as I heard it, I quickly looked behind me and saw a huge white dog chasing after me. It was around 3 feet tall with a pure white coat. I didn't see its face or anything else than a white flash of fur as I started trying to pedal faster. Then, finally, I heard it gaining on me, and adrenaline made me jump off my bike. As quickly as I could, I turned around and started yelling as loud as I could and waving my arms at it. It was a stupid idea, now that I think about it in hindsight. But at the time, I didn't have many other options, and luckily for me, my idea had worked and I saw it run back into the tall grass where it had come from. I biked as fast as I could back to my house and everything was fine for the rest of the night. The next day I went around all the homes in the area. I had asked if they had a dog like the one I saw the night before and they all said they had never seen anything like it. Fortunately, I have yet to see it again, but this frightened me. The only reason this dog had scared me so badly was because of a story my dad had told me a little bit ago. He and one of his exes used to live up there a long time ago, and one night they were driving up the road not far from my street. He said that they were coming back from exploring an abandoned house. They had passed by a heavily forested area and were listening to music. Then he suddenly said that they saw a vast white wolf running at the same pace as the car. It had tried to ram into the side of it as hard as it could. However, when they had gotten far enough away, they got out to check the vehicle to see how much damage there was. The scariest part is there was not even a dent or a scratch on the car. The story my dad told me has chilled me to the bone because I believe we encountered the same exact thing. We wanted to have a good time together. my girlfriend and me. You see, she's a nurse and must work the night shift. The hospital she works at requires about 5 years of experience before you can even think of working the day shift. This wouldn't be such a problem, but I work as a marketer. I work a typical 9 to 5 in an office, and finding time for each other is tough. Our sleep schedules are chaotic, so when Valentine's Day rolled on a day and night we were both working and we got frustrated, it was hard to explain how you feel when you're being cheated out of time. Like, there isn't going to be a moment you can sit down and truly enjoy your relationship for what it is. But we decided we wouldn't let our lame schedules get the best of us. We decided we would visit the city for a weekend getaway. Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday, but we figured having a little weekend trip would be the next best thing, maybe even better. She's been adamant about visiting the Oak Ridge area in Tennessee. Her grandfather worked there back in the day, which always interested her. She's always telling me these facts about how creepy it is and how she must go one day. It's roughly an 8-hour drive from where we live, so we made a deal about driving. I was going to drive the entire way there, and she was going to drive while we were in the city. She got the good deal of the bargain, but that's what you do when you care for your girlfriend. But something strange happened, something that has tainted my memory ever since that time. When I think back and remember that weekend getaway, I'm not thinking about us cuddling up on the couch, or any of the fun places we got to visit there. We got there Friday night. She mostly slept in the car but felt tired still. She told me she'd be able to sleep that night we got there and be awake and expected for the next day. So that's just what we did, and it was a great day. We got to visit the museum and learned about the Manhattan Project. She even got to see the plant where her grandfather used to work, and at least we're pretty sure it was that. He's deceased now, but the tour guide said this is where most of the work of the bombs was done, and, well, I guess he worked on them. Anyway, the day was great, but it didn't last very long. By the time it was dark, we were out of ideas for things to do, and quite frankly, out of energy. So we decided to visit our favorite fast food joint, Wendy's. Don't judge us. And she was driving as we made our way there. It was only 10 or 15 minutes. She had her music on and I looked out the window. At one point, a blue Mustang was beside our car. We were stopped at a red light and I looked out the window and peered into theirs. I saw a significantly older man. He looked unhappy, miserable even. His skin looked pale, unnaturally pale. I'm not sure when he started, but he was also staring at me. It wasn't until I investigated the car that I noticed either. I'm not going to lie. It freaked me out. We made eye contact for about 5 to 10 seconds. And then, for the briefest moments, he smiled. But it was so fast. It must have been a split second that his mouth went into a smile and then back into a frown. It was the strangest thing I have ever seen. I looked over at my girlfriend, who had noticed. She was jamming out to Bohemian Rhapsody. The light turned green, and we were in motion again. I didn't take my eyes off that car for the rest of the ride. At least until they turned. That's not the craziest part, though. You see, it gets even weirder. We were planning on leaving Monday morning, and on Sunday night we went out to eat, but this time to an actual restaurant. We weren't feeling fast food again, so we looked up on the internet. A great place that was a local restaurant with great reviews. I had my favorite food, deep fried chicken, so off we went. I had completely forgotten about the strange man I saw in the car, but halfway through our meal, I noticed him again. This time he was in the restaurant. He was staring at me. I know he was, and when I saw it, he did that same facial movement, just the way I remembered. He went from a miserable frown, and in a split second he was smiling, only for his face to be frowning again in the next instant. I'm not sure what I said about my reaction. He hadn't done anything wrong to me, and I was enjoying a nice meal with my girlfriend. Therefore it was strange for my fight or flight instinct to kick in, and I went up and confronted him. He was sitting at a booth alone. I asked him why he was looking at me. To my absolute surprise, he never said a word. They just sat there and frowned at me. I asked him what his problem was before my girlfriend told me it was time, and we headed home. She knows I can get a little worked up and wanted to avoid a confrontation. It's not illegal to look at people, she spoke. Still though, something about that man made me feel strange and uncomfortable. So I watched. Well, Monday morning came, and about an hour into the car ride home, she was asleep again. And you guessed it, I saw the freaky older man again. But this time, it was way worse. For starters, he was driving a different car. I don't know what this guy's life is like, but I can imagine you must do something interesting to afford a Mustang and still have enough money to have a second car. And to make things even worse, he had been in the left lane as if he was going to pass me, but he didn't. He just paced with me for about a mile. Finally, I noticed a car next to me, and it wasn't until I looked over to flip the bird that I recognized him. It was the creepy older guy. But he wasn't frowning anymore. That smile he'd only been able to muster for a split second was permanently stained on his aged face. It was the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. Suddenly, he turns his head forward and aggressively veers his car in my direction. Reflexively, I slam on the brakes and swerve off the side of the road to avoid him. My girlfriend is shaken awake, and all we could see is his vehicle speeding off in the distance through a cloud of dirt. My heart was racing like crazy, and I couldn't process much with my girlfriend screaming and asking what was going on. I started to feel myself choke up. We discussed whether we should waste our time calling the police, but I was so scared that the best course of action seemed to be getting out of that godforsaken town as fast as possible. The rest of the ride happened without incident, and I haven't been there since, or seen that guy. That was the least romantic and most insane Valentine's Day ever. I haven't told this story to too many people, and it still creeps me out to this day. When I was 12 years old, in about 2013, I moved to this old house built in the 1940s. No one has lived in this house for over 30 years, and it was the first fall I've ever seen at this house. I was taking the trash out to our back porch, and from there I could see a tree line that is usually very green and hard to see through, but seeing how it was fall, the leaves are almost all fallen on the ground. As I was walking out to the trash, I look at the tree line, about 30 to 40 yards away, and I see 4 to 5 at least 7-foot tall pure white humanoids with no faces. I stand there in awe, not knowing what to think at first. It looked like they were talking with hand gestures, but I couldn't hear anything. Now that I think of it, I heard nothing at the time. No birds, no bugs, not even the trees moving with the visibly moving branches in the wind. Finally I screamed, "Hey!" to which the creatures became motionless, like statues. I proceeded to ask, "Who are you?" I stood there for a few seconds before the animals or creatures or whatever they were dispersed. I could see far into the woods, and yet they all went their separate ways, not even hearing a leaf or a twig crack when they fled. They ran off so quickly that it seemed like a blur. After that, I completely forgot about the experience until later that night. As I said, I was young, and at this time, my mom worked the night shift and wasn't there when I screamed at these creatures initially. Just so you know, I live on essential farmland, but my neighbors could easily walk up to my driveway in a matter of 2 to 3 minutes. So later that night, around 9 p.m., I heard knocking on my back door, which led to the back porch where the creatures were, and I thought maybe my mom had told the neighbors to check up on me, so I could check it out. So I went to the back door, turned the rear porch light on, and opened it and saw that there was no one there. So I chalked it up to maybe it was one of my dogs hitting the door or something around it. After this, knocking kept coming from the door, which was weird because every time I rounded the door to where I could see, there would be nobody there. Now this happens a few more times for a couple of minutes. It ranged from when I turned my back from the entrance to when the moment I sit back on my bed, waiting 5 to 10 minutes before it happens again. Finally, after this and the increasing anxiety, I got fed up and went outside to scream, "I don't know who you are, but you better stop." To my surprise, it did, for about 30 minutes. Then the knocking came from all around the house, windows, doors, walls, everything, much more intense. I was scared and curled in the corner of my bed. Finally, after about 30 minutes, there was one last bang outside my window that I felt shook the entire house. I was shocked that the window didn't break. That was the end of it, and I didn't hear anything for the other 5 years that I lived there. I have never been able to understand if these things were connected or not, the creature and the knocking. But what scares me the most is the thought that this creature could shake my house and leave no damage. I lived in Tennessee at the time, by the way, if this helps anybody figure out what this thing could have been. I've always been interested in the paranormal and unexplained since I was a young kid after having an experience with what I now believe to be a black-eyed kid. But that's another story for another day. This story takes place when I was 15 or so in the middle of Tennessee. Back then I was going through my edgy phase as we all do, and I thought it was cool to go into the woods alone to blow off steam and whatnot. I spent a lot of time with my grandma as my dad worked 6 days a week and didn't feel comfortable leaving me home alone, since we lived in a sort of sketchy, meth head area town, whereas my grandma lived in a relatively nicer area. She owns a few good acres of land, and if you go far enough into the woods, this beautiful waterfall leads to an underground spring. One day, I was trekking the land I knew like the back of my hand at that point, enjoying the peacefulness the wilderness had to offer. After going uphill for some time, then it starts going downhill. There was a clearing that will take you straight to the waterfall. Washing my feet as I walked, always cautious to not step on the copperhead, I came down the hill to the clearing. Right at the bottom of the hill, something unusual caught my eye. It took a second to realize what I was staring at, but it was the skeleton of a deer, freshly killed. Now normally I wouldn't overthink this, but something felt wrong about this entire sight. There was no rotted skin or signs of flesh anywhere. These bones still had fresh blood but no sign of skin or anything of the like. My young teenage mind tried to process this, and I couldn't think of any predator that lived in this area that could strip a deer like this. No hunter would dump the bones in this area because this was not an area where hunters were known to hunt. The moment I realized this was wrong, a sense of impending doom washed over me. My fight or flight kicked in. It felt like the trees and ground all around me, even above me, were moving, shaking like something fast was coming towards me. I took off as fast as my legs would take me, not looking behind me for a second. But I could sense that something there was chasing after me. I heard the twigs and sticks break under the weight of something behind me, running fast behind me, right on my heels. I don't think I ever ran that fast in my life. Once I was out of that clearing in the woods and back in my grandmother's backyard, the feeling of safety finally washed over me. I don't know what was in those woods that day, but I didn't hike back there alone ever again. So I told a school friend this story the other day, and he said maybe I should send it into the show and see if anyone knew or had an explanation as to what I had seen. Here's some background information. I am a 16-year-old male, and my father and I were hog hunting in southern Tennessee. We've taken trips to hunt for various game every single year. This year, though, we had a good season for deer and didn't want to let the hunting be over, so we decided to hunt hogs. If you didn't know, hogs are a nuisance species, meaning that they could be hunted any time of year. Anyways, now that that's all out of the way, he had come with me to my stand and given me general directions to his if I ended up needing them. I didn't see anything all afternoon, and as the sun began to set, I heard what sounded like a gunshot and squealing. From the direction that I heard it from, I understood that this would be my dad's stand. I sat there for a moment and decided maybe if I'd wait, I'd see something. Seeing as the sun was already setting, I figured it'd be better just to help with my little light that I had. After about 3 minutes of walking, I came up on what I thought was his stand, though it looked like a shack. It looked unkept and very shoddy. I approached it and saw my dad through a gap in one of the walls and assumed I was at the shooting window. I whispered, asking him if he had gotten anything. He very slowly turned to look at me. If you hunt, you know that your head movements must be slow as not to alert any game. But this was not that. It was more of a foreign movement, one resembling that of a serial killer in some super dumb horror movie. He looked at me with a blank expression for a minute. Well, not empty. It was more of like that with a slight hint of anger. But I quickly chalked that up to my dad, wondering why I'd leave my stand before he called. Seeing that, I decided he was not ready to go yet, so I returned to my stand without questioning him further. Sure enough, my dad called my cell phone a few minutes later after returning to my perspective, saying he was coming to get me and we would leave. On the way home, I asked him why he didn't say anything when I came by. He looked at me confused and said something along the lines of, "You never came to me, I didn't see you." And I laughed briefly and asked, "No, seriously, my dad is a jokester, but not a prankster or someone who likes scaring people." But he was dead serious. He genuinely said I never came to see him. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. Did I see like some sort of doppelganger? Maybe a skinwalker? A fleshgate? I don't know, maybe it was some sort of weird interdimensional gate I walked through and saw him through a different parallel universe. But all I can say is that it was strange and it gives me goosebumps to think about. The backwoods of North Carolina are full of old, sleeping houses that ought to be torn down. They dream only awful things. I grew up in a very, very small farm town with a population below 150 or so people. I won't name drop the town for obvious reasons, and even if I did, you wouldn't find anything to write home about. There is a caution light and several abandoned buildings, a barely functional gas station that will grossly overcharge you, and that's really about it. If you go more than half a mile in any direction, you will officially be outside of city limits, though there are dozens of people who live in these heavily wooded farmlands that we call the town home, simply because it's the closest thing in shouting distance, though that would be akin to saying that Mars was within shouting distance of Earth. I've had a few experiences in these woods that I cannot fully explain. I will describe them the best I can, but I cannot offer any scientific explanation for them. I know that the tales of wendigos and skinwalkers and other forest demon spooks are popular, but wendigos are creatures that belong to the tribal legends centered around the Great Lakes region of the northern United States and eastern coast of Canada. Skinwalkers are pretty much exclusively tied to the Navajo religion and Navajo grounds, which are in the deserts of the far west of the United States. Keep that in mind as you read this. I first noticed this presence when I was around 12 years old. Playing in the woods was really the only pastime I had available to me outside of playing video games, but video games got old rather quickly. I was an only child and there wasn't very much to do, and not very many other children in the area, so exploring the woods was a good outlet for my imagination. Prior to my first real experience, the spookiest thing in the woods around here would have been a venomous snake. Even then, the snakes we have here aren't likely to kill you unless you just seriously neglect the wound or have an allergic reaction. Aside from them, the largest predators we have are coyotes, which are usually afraid of humans, and the rare cougar that happens to be passing through, which is so infrequent that it isn't even worth worrying about. So the first day in question was a normal day. I was walking, hiking, collecting rocks, building forts out of sticks, the standard things a 12-year-old boy does. It was about sundown, and I wasn't quite ready to head home yet, when I noticed that something was off. During the summer in North Carolina, the woods are anything but quiet. You have a cacophony of sounds. Cicadas, crickets, frogs, birds. There's a whole chorus of wildlife that all wants to be heard. Heck, you may even get the occasional coyote pack howling or a bobcat screaming. The point of this is that the woods are far from quiet, and the sudden silence in the woods at these times was no accident. But that's precisely what I noticed. All the noises had stopped abruptly. I could hear the wind between the mixture of old growth and pines, and I could hear the distant babbling of a creek, but that was about it. It was strange to me, but at the time I did not realize what an ill omen it was in of itself. I remember thinking that the water sounded peaceful and walking deeper into the woods to listen to it better. As I did, though, I began to get this overwhelming sense of foreboding. It wasn't the standard I feel like I'm being watched. No. I didn't feel any eyes on me or feel like I was being followed or any of those standard paranoias. No, this was... Have you ever stayed at a party too long, you get there at 9, now it's 2 a.m. and suddenly you realize that you don't know anybody who's there? You also didn't see the new guy come in, but now they're staring at you. And come to think about it, so was the girl in the kitchen. You've overstayed your welcome, and it's probably time to go. You know that whole situation? That's exactly what it felt like. Even if I lacked the metaphor to express it at the time, the air itself felt heavy. Everything in my mind and body was screaming at me that I needed to leave. It was telling me that this place was not mine anymore. It had been fine in the morning hours, but now, this was the domain of someone or something else, and I was not welcome. I remember feeling as if the trees were warning me, leave or else. So I did, initially. I walked, but by the time the sun had begun its descent and the sky had begun to darken into twilight, I noticed that I was jogging, almost subconsciously. I never broke into a full sprint. I don't know why, but I felt showing too much fear was a bad idea. Eventually, I made it back to the road and looked back to the woods. I did not see anything, but that's when the feeling of being watched really set in. I felt that there were eyes just beyond the tree line and out of sight, and that they were staring right back at me. I went home and pushed the experience out of my mind as best as I could. From then on, I made it a point to always be out of the woods by dark or have a firearm with me if I knew I was staying later. I should note that there were several times after I wound up in the woods at dusk, but did not have this feeling return. There weren't any special circumstances that seemed to summon it, just sometimes things were fine, others I all but sprinted for civilization. I didn't have any more overt experiences, however, until years later. I do not know what the catalyst was, but the activity ramped up dramatically in a year's span. The first experience like this was in October of 2018, and since then, the woods have gone from home for the occasional unsettling experience to a place of actual danger and terror. I went camping with some college friends of mine during the October in question. In total, there were 3 of us, and we were mostly roughing it. We had a tent, but we chopped our own firewood and all that jazz. We camped deep in the woods. It was dark by the time we fully set up and had finished cooking. We ate, and then we proceeded to get very drunk. I don't know how much we drank, as we were just sipping out of the handle of vodka and passing it around the campfire, as we talked about everything from ghost stories to the more tangible fears in our lives, such as our dating lives and the prospects of post-graduation plans. This went on well into the night, with the stories growing more nonsensical and the laughter growing louder as the bottle grew lighter. By 1:30 a.m. or so, it had grown deathly cold. I decided that it was time for me to go to sleep, and that I was going to get in my sleeping bag. The other 2 weren't ready to sleep yet, and one of my friends, we'll call him Frank, decided he wanted to smoke a cigarette. Meanwhile, the other friend, we'll call him Tim, decided that this was a good time for him to climb a large rock about 70 or so yards away from the tent. Frank begrudgingly goes to supervise while he finishes off his cigarette. So they're both a good 70, maybe 80 yards away from my tent. I'm now in my sleeping bag and trying to fall asleep, and I can hear them laughing and talking about something. It's obviously far away, so I can't quite tell what they're saying. It's right at this time that something heavy slams into the side of my tent, like heavy enough that I'm surprised the tent didn't collapse. I didn't move. I was drunk, but not so drunk not to realize that whatever was out there didn't stop to borrow a cup of sugar. That sense of dread filled me at once. Even though I had my shotgun with me, I could not bring myself to reach for it. I felt staying still was a safer approach. I heard something breathing. It wasn't human breathing, though. It was loud and weirdly wet sounding. It wasn't sniffing or anything like that, just deeply breathing. This only went on for a total, maybe less than 10 seconds, and at once it was gone. No footsteps, no banging on the tent, no gradual decline in breathing, nothing. It was gone, and Frank and Tim never seen that it was there, let alone what it might have been. It's honestly probably best that they didn't. They stayed up a while longer before turning in. I woke up first thing and stepped out to see if there were any footprints. There weren't, but there was something more ominous. The entire clearing we were camping in now had something scattered out throughout the grass. It looked like circles of bones. Not large bones, but crushed up and arranged bones of all creatures like rabbits and small birds. I would assume we were in some sort of predator's hunting ground, save for the fact that the bones were neatly arranged in circles, all the same sizes, with equal spacing. I woke up Tim and Frank. We packed up and left immediately. This last experience is the most recent and the most intense. There was a meteor shower not too long ago, and I returned to the clearing where my friends and I were camping to observe it, as there was very little light pollution there. It was stellar, and I loved every second of it, but I was not out there long when my dog, I brought him with me, he is good company, started acting strange. He had pinned his ears back while lying down, and was now staring very intently at the tree line. He wasn't barking or growling. He was silent, but just watching it intently. It was strange, but I assumed he had caught wind of the deer or prey animal, and he was on the hunt, though he was far too lazy to go chase it. After a moment, a nearby coyote howled. I felt a wave of relief, as my dog's behavior was beginning to make me uneasy. He was just tense because of the coyote, and it would pass. There was something wrong, though. First of all, coyotes, they usually hunt in packs. It's extremely uncommon for a solo coyote to hunt and howl like this. Second, my dog had begun to whimper now and was shying back to the edge of the truck as though he were afraid, and the coyote was drawing closer, it seemed. My brain began connecting a lot of dots. The woods were silent. That feeling had returned. I was in the same spot as the last encounter, and then I registered the sound of branches breaking. Coyotes are definitely not heavy enough to do that, I thought. And the second I did, as though whatever it was out there waited for me to realize that this thing was not a coyote, it stopped pretending to be one. Or at least, I don't know. It stopped howling. It then erupted into the most horrible sound that I've ever heard. The coyote was laughing. It wasn't a hyena sort of laugh, though. This was garbled. It was a mangled mess of sound that sounded like an animal trying to do a piss-poor job to impersonate the cadence of human laughter. And it was on this recording track where after every fourth laugh it seemed to loop. It was rapidly growing louder over the sound of breaking branches. I frantically jumped up, grabbed my dog, and fumbled for my truck keys to get out of there. As I tried to get my keys and my door open, the laugh stopped only for this guttural and deep scream to resound from the forest. I say deep to emphasize that it was not a bobcat or a fox. They have high-pitched sounds. This was very low. It had the same pitch as, say, a roar, but it was in the same horribly botched nonsense that the laugh was in. Of course, the laughter resumed immediately, but as I got in my truck and turned my lights on, it went dead silent. In a moment of stupid bravado and curiosity, I turned my truck towards the tree line before I left to shine my headlights to see if I saw anything. Between the trees, I saw what seemed to be a man. He was of average height and wearing a white t-shirt and I assumed blue jeans. Though I could not see a face or arms or anything of that nature, just his silhouette and his clothes. In hindsight, I think he was only a silhouette. Maybe. I blinked and he was gone. That's my story. I don't know what is in the woods of North Carolina. I don't want to know, and it's probably best if you don't try to find out. It doesn't seem too welcoming to strangers.
When I was about 18, I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina, and around there it is known for its history having ghost tours, festivals, and whatever touristic stuff you'd like around the river and beach. The island is, however, known for darker things, having been part of a place of war and other things in the past. I had a friend I named Solo Cup. He had been at work all night, so I had fallen asleep playing music while I waited for him to get back, and I woke to a tapping sound. I thought it was just one of our other roommates moving in their sleep in the other room, or something simple, but yet I still couldn't sleep after. I looked at the time to see if Solo Cup was arriving soon, and it was about to be 3 a.m., so I started to worry. Oddly enough, I had woken up just in time as he came into the room to chat and sleep. We were lying there in the dark for a moment, in between talking, and the tapping came again fiercely at the window this time. The window was 2 stories up on this beach house, and nothing was under it. I grabbed his arm as we met eyes for a second, Then I looked back at the window. I asked him if it was windy on his way back from work, and he said no. I told him, "Nothing can make that noise. Look at the placement of the house." And it happened again. We didn't sleep next to the window. After the following days, we visited my grandmother to spend some time around her and eat some breakfast the next morning. When we arrived, I was waiting in the car so he could go check if the door was unlocked without me getting cold. Solo Cup walks to the old house and goes to open the glass door on the outside. And as he does, this decrepit, scary old woman that was clearly not his grandma walked up to the door and stared at both of us. We saw it clear as day. His grandmother lived alone, and this was not anyone we knew. My eyes met hers, and even without glasses, her eyes burned into my soul. They weren't human. They were solid black. Solo Cup let go of the door and let it close, never taking his eyes off of her, and that thing disappeared into the darkness of the house from the porch light. We knew Wilmington probably was haunted, but never thought we'd find a haunting so close to home.
Me, my friend, and my girlfriend were staying on top of a small mountain in a yurt in North Carolina for 3 days. The yurt was one large cylindrical room with 2 futons and a kitchen table. 2 doors to enter the yurt from a porch that circled about half of the building. The first door was to the north and the second door to the west. The second door was close to the futons and the main entrance was north from the futons. On the first night, we made dinner and fell asleep after a 9-hour drive. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. We went out hiking in the morning and had a full day. Lots of fun. We came back and I made dinner and we passed out. That night, my girlfriend woke up and had an extreme and sudden notion that the doors needed to be locked. She got up and locked the door and went back to sleep. She claimed she woke up in a sleepy daze to what looked like a black silhouette sitting at the dinner table next to the bed. She shook it off as a dream or some sort of sleepy hallucination and went back to sleep. We went out again on our 3rd day hiking and returned at sundown. I wanted to take a time lapse of the sun retreating over the mountains, so I ran up to the top of our little hill to set up a time lapse aimed down at the yurt. As I was doing this, my girlfriend and another friend were exploring a trail that led back into the woods of the mountain. We all went back in, and I left the camera shooting. I made dinner and then we ate. Afterward, I went up to the top of the hill, alone to retrieve my camera. This is where things started to get weird. I took a pee by my tripod, and as soon as I finished, this wave of what I can only explain as energy enveloped me. I suddenly had this image in my mind of something behind me in the woods, slowly approaching, like a wall of fog or something. In my mind, I kept having this image of a strange white figure that could have been like a humanoid tree, kneeling by the ground and standing up, then sitting only to repeat this action multiple times. I know this was just in my head, but it was all I could pinpoint. It was like this idea was stuck repeating in my head. So I grabbed my stuff and went in for the night. We all fell asleep in the middle of the night, but I awoke to a huge bang on the wood that sounded like the north door being hit. I was very tired and looked around. Neither my girlfriend nor my friend on the futon 5 feet away were awake. I shrugged it off and tried to go back asleep. I continue to have dreams as if my vision was just floating inside the yurt, slowly panning along the inner wall, looking outside of the windows for hours. Like I was standing in the yurt, walking around, but I had nobody, and there was no sound of me walking. Then, I awake again to a huge bang on the other door just 6 feet from the futon. Since my body was toward it, I opened my eyes and I was immediately fixated at the door, which had a full glass window with a shade. I watched intently, looking to see someone, but there was nothing. In my head, I was saying, "Screw this," and shut my eyes and went back to bed. Hours pass and I wake up a 3rd time. This time I was on my side and didn't open my eyes. To my horror, I can hear a voice just outside. It was a sort of inflection more than words. It spoke like a way a person was speaking to another. I have this notion that there were two of whatever it was, looking in as to say,
Look, you can see them right there.
I was petrified, and I looked quick to see the time. It was 5:30 a.m. I once again said F that and went to sleep for the final time. Finally, when we all woke up together, I said to my friend, I don't want to alarm you, but I was hearing some messed up stuff last night. Both my girlfriend and my friend said that they were woken up by those big bangs as well. They were just too scared to say anything. The weird thing is, when each of us hears the noise and wakes up, we had seen that the others were asleep. I do not know what this was, but I think we angered something by peeing on top of its mountain. This happened when I was 13 years old. It was a cold January night, and my friend and I were watching scary movies in my living room when I got a text from a girl who lives up the road. Alyssa wanted us to come over, and since we live in the rural part of North Carolina, her house was about 5 miles away. We had gone over to her house before, but never when it has been this cold. It was -5 degrees. We put on our jackets and gloves and left the house. To get to her house, we must first walk up to my driveway, which is about a half-mile long, walk down an unlit road for about a mile past a small pond, and then continue on an old train track for about 3 miles, which we would then get off and walk through the woods toward her house. The train track passes by a small trailer park across the way from a brick house. We had walked about halfway there when we passed that old brick house. The man who lives there has several hound dogs for hunting. As I said, we live in rural North Carolina, and at night he locks them in a large fenced-in cage so they don't chase off the deer. We crept on past the opposite side of the tracks, closer to a trailer on the edge of the trailer park. The dog started to bark at us, so we ran until we were out of sight. We finally arrived at the house and stayed for a couple of hours. Then we left. On the way back, we stopped about 100 yards short of passing the dogs. For some reason, they were already barking at something. They were chasing something up against the fence, barking at the trailer across the tracks. We couldn't see well since it was a new moon. My friend Connor said he didn't want to go past the trailer. He said he was scared there was something weird happening over there. I shrugged this off because Connor is younger than I am. He is also a lot shorter and slower than me. When we run past the trailer, he can't really keep up. I said I wasn't going to run past him, so we went along. As we got closer, I began to feel a little nervous. I began to get that feeling you know when someone is watching you, but I ignored it. Suddenly, Connor gasped and pointed behind me. Someone was trying to grab me from the bushes in front of the trailer. We ran the whole way home and hid in my room with my doors locked. We talked about what had happened for a while, but I'm not sure what our conclusion really was. We decided to keep my dog in our room for protection, and we decided to go to sleep at around 3 a.m. As I was drifting off to sleep, I got that same feeling as before when we ran past the trailer house. I opened my eyes, and to my horror, there was someone looking at me through my window. I screamed and my dad came rushing into my room. By the time he was there, the man had already disappeared. My dad called the cops and said they would be over to check the area. They came and searched for about an hour, but they didn't find anything to note. The next morning, I texted Alyssa and told her what happened. She texted back a minute later and told us that there had been breaking and entering in the trailer park. I don't know what the guy would have done if I hadn't seen him outside my window, but I never went past that house again. First, I live in Murphy, North Carolina, in the center of town. And to the right of my house is a wooded area that is fenced off. I'm mentioning this because it could be of some importance. I'm a 31-year-old female, and on weekends, I'm home alone because my 2 kids stay with my uncle and my husband works late hours. I was coming home from my friend's house. She lives just a couple houses up from me. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I returned home. There are street lights that come to about the mid part of my street and end there. It's about a 40-foot walk in pitch darkness that I have to go to enter my house. I usually go in through the back door because the front door was locked to keep stupid people out. Well, I was chilling on my mattress in my living room. We moved it in there because it's cold in my house and it's easier to move around because I have nerve damage in my foot. So, I was watching some anime, then paused the episode to eat because it's hard for me to eat ramen noodles and watch TV without my glasses sliding down my nose, and I had just let in my cat Ryu because he was meowing frantically at the door. As I opened it, he ran inside and I shut the door. I was puzzled because I didn't know what was wrong. Normally, he stays out all night. I sat back down, and as I finished my food, I heard this strange noise on my porch. It sounded like something in between a goat and a bear cub right in front of my door. At first, I thought I was going crazy until I looked at my 3 cats, Ryu, Dottie, and Lilith. They were looking straight at the front door and were growling and hissing at the noise. And every 30 to 40 seconds, it would make that horrible noise and end with clicking sounds and thumping on the outside of my house. At this point, I was terrified. Tears began to fall down my cheeks, tears of fear. I hurriedly texted my husband at work and told him that I heard something strange and the cats were acting very weird. He told me to lock the front door. I was terrified of making any noise, and as I approached the door, I was on my knees. I didn't want to see the thing, and as I reached the door lock, it made that same sound again. I jumped in fear, hurriedly locked the door, and scrambled back to my bed. The sounds of thumping on the walls made me burst into tears, and I pulled my blankets over me. I was so scared. Then the sound stopped abruptly, and all was silent. As my heart raced, I sat still, afraid to make the smallest sound. I had thought about calling 911, but they would never believe me. I felt trapped and stalked. As I stared around checking my cat's reactions, I heard this loud sound that sounded almost like a howler monkey, and as fast as it started, it stopped. Then, probably about 5 minutes later, I could hear it circle my house, making that sound like a goat and a bear, and it was scratching and thumping on the house. By this time, my chest hurt from the stress and fear. I felt the sensation like impending doom and evil. It made this goat-like sound and returned to my porch, and for a few seconds it got louder, and then it vanished. One thing I know for sure is, from the Native American part of my family, is that they say a lot of things are here in the Smoky Mountains, and to never look at them. I also need to say that I have been a witch ever since I was 13 years old, and I am linked also by the Nordic blood in my family from the other side. We know a few things about magic and the creatures of the woods that are natural. I've grown up with them, but the sound I heard was nothing an animal would make around here. I don't know what it was, but I'm afraid it might come back and stalk me again. What I'm telling you sounds impossible, and I'm sure this was my first encounter with this thing, but I'm sure it's not my last. If anyone has any advice that could help me feel safe and protect my family, please let me know. Any help would be appreciated.